Hello there, YouTube. I would like to share a story of a gaming session I ran last night. If you've been following any of my Facebook posts or watching any of my videos, you've probably noticed that I've been having problems getting my group together. People are either not showing up or just don't feel like making characters, but still nagging about gaming. And so I know it was the Easter weekend, but I knew everyone would have Easter off, so I said, let's do something Saturday night. I sent a text message out to a bunch of people. Some didn't respond back. Stop by their house, did you get the message? We're going to game Saturday night. You've been asking. This is your chance. You've got this campaign idea. Present to the rest of the group, and we'll see what we can decide on, and we'll get a game going again. And some people respond positively. Some people, I've got family obligations this weekend, which is cool. I understand. Saturday comes. One of the guys who was most adamant about gaming again, just a bucket of excuses. And I think he just sat on his computer all day and didn't even bother to come over and show up. So until he comes and talks to me and comes and talks to the rest of the group, he's out. But we only had two people show up because other people had family obligations or flaked out or whatever. And one of the people's a newer gamer, and the other person was a veteran gamer, been gaming for 15 years or more at least. So he knew how to make character, but the other guy didn't know how to make character very well, and he didn't really want to. And we had already spent like 2 hours talking about, well, what game do we want to play, and we could not decide on one because whatever sounded cool to him, okay, let's make a character, and then, oh, I don't want to make a character. Well, let's just do this. Well, last time we did that campaign, you were on your cell phone the whole time, so I know you don't enjoy that. Let's do something fun. Let's role play and have a good time and actually enjoy it. And actually, while I'm taking a leak, I stepped out of the room, and it just came to me, where I told the two people when I came out, I said, make yourself what your age is ×2 in character points for GURPS. Don't worry about the number of disadvantages. Your inventory is everything that you personally own, so you don't have to worry about buying equipment. Just go through the stats, write down what you legitimately feel are the stats that represent you, write down the advantages that you personally have, write down the disadvantages that you have regardless of the total. And both of them took cigarette smoking addiction for 5 points, and one guy's on probation, so I gave him a 10-point disadvantage for that. And I want to say they both ended up, give or take, around 40 points in disadvantages, so it didn't actually get overwhelming by any means. But what the whole point of it was to introduce particularly my newer player to how the game actually works and what role-playing is about. Because at least for me, when I run, I don't want it to be about just character sheets, rolling dice, dungeon hacks, and getting experience, getting loot, buying better equipment, leveling up. That's why I play GURPS. I don't like that very boring, repetitive mechanic. So we just went through the basic chapters, the attributes chapter, advantages, disadvantages, and skills. That's all he needed to make a character, and we just went down the list. I had a book, he had a book, and after he got done with advantages, let's flip disadvantages. Let's go through those together. And we went line by line, kind of going through. Well, of course, we know you don't have magical aptitude, but he took alertness and strong will. And we worked that into his character concept. But one of the bigger disadvantages that the other player suggested was unlucky. And what that disadvantage does is one time per gaming session, essentially the GM can fuck you as a player without, well, not literally, but can screw you over as a player without actually overtly killing you or another party member. So I made him take that, and that was his big disadvantage, and that got him to the point total he was at. And they weren't stellar characters by any means. One character was a 52-point character, and the other character was 64, I think. 64? No, 72, because he's 36. But they had made themselves, and very quick character creation, because my thought is, if you GURPS is such a realistic system, and it doesn't have to be realistic, of course. You can make fantasy characters and science fiction characters, but the simplest and easiest character you should ever be able to make is you. And my argument with role-playing in general is, if you can't make yourself as a character and play yourself as a character, then you really have no business role-playing, because, I mean, how can you not play yourself? How do you not know how to make yourself? That should be the easiest character to make. And if you can make, especially as your first character, if you can make yourself as your first character, or one of your first characters, it will be very easy. And talking to GMs, if you have a new group, having everybody make their own themselves as their own character, just do a one-shot, because that's what I did. I didn't have a campaign ready, but I had actually made, for a completely different campaign, I made Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th at 200 points, and I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to have them make themselves. I'm going to get them out in the middle of nowhere, essentially, or away from civilization, and I'm going to attack them with Jason Voorhees and just see what happens. Well, after they made their characters, I started the story without them really knowing what's going on. They're both in the restaurant industry, so I told them they had to drive out of town to the next bigger town for a big seminar on cooking or whatever, and I made it sound nice and juicy, giving them a free buffet, stay at the Holiday Inn, seminars all day, and drink vouchers at the bar after 6 p.m. or whatever. So they were like, oh yeah, I'm not just going to work, but they're still playing themselves. They're not doing anything different than they normally would. And by using certain story mechanics, I got them off the highway into essentially rural farmland, and once they discover parts of a dismembered college camper or whatever that was going fishing, there in the middle of the creek there is standing Jason Voorhees, and they end up fighting him. They're making fright checks and look checks all the time. But the other thing about that is, I'm not just making them roll to do by the book. I'm using the rolls to keep the action going, not to slow it down. And that's what the dice rolls should be about too, is not to be like, okay, we got to the room, everybody roll your dice, and then I'll come up with something to describe. You continue the narrative. And as you're continuing the narrative, you tell your players to roll, and while they're rolling and adding that up, you keep that as part of the narrative. Well, they rolled poorly on their look check. They rolled poorly on their fright check. Well, you just describe the look check, and as you're describing that, you want them to roll that fright check, because it's fucking Jason Voorhees, and there's a bloody arm and in a pool of blood laying on the ground. He's 100 feet away from you, hockey mask, sharpened lawnmower blade, standing in the middle of the creek just staring at you guys. Roll a fright check, which they rolled several fright checks throughout the things that progressively move towards this kind of climax of encountering Jason Voorhees. And I didn't actually have any of this planned out. I just did this kind of on the spur of the moment based on, how they reacted and how they rolled. Eventually, of course, they were going to run into Jason Voorhees. It didn't matter where they went. He was going to be there. But I used it as an opportunity to introduce somebody to the GURPS system and introduce them to good role-playing at the same time, and introduce them to not just the character creation process of GURPS, but also the role-playing aspect of not just the GURPS system, but what role-playing is in general. By making himself as a character, he felt confident that all his decisions were going to be what he would do, because he didn't have to think, well, I'm a ice elf from It Doesn't Fucking Matter, because you're not into the character. But if you're making you're into that character. And by keep the dice rolling, and the other guy, I talked to him a little bit afterwards, and he did comment that we were rolling dice a lot more than we normally do. And I don't try and use that as a crutch, but I wanted to make sure and teach my newer player how the mechanics work. And by repeating the mechanics, it became familiar, but also incorporating that naturally into the narrative and naturally into the story. It doesn't seem forced when you scramble up to the top of the hill and make your look roll as you're running back towards the pickup. What do you see? Well, he's running, roll, and in his head he's imagining himself running, and of course he tells me what his roll, and I give him a description based on how well he rolls. And then he sees Jason Voorhees between him and the truck. Roll your fright check, which they both actually failed and were stunned for a couple of seconds. Not just stunned for a couple seconds, but they lost some fatigue points. And instead of saying you lose a D4 fatigue points and you're stunned for roll 5 seconds, that's not fun. That's not cool. Instead, I worked that into the narrative. You're running along the path and you see Jason Voorhees, and roll your fright check, which they failed. And as quick as I can to keep the game flowing, I rolled on the fright check failure table, and they both basically rolled the same thing. Instead of saying you lost a D4 hit points, I told them they feel in their heart like they got hit in the chest by a sledgehammer, and all hope just drains out of them. And then I worked in there, and you also lose 4 fatigue points. You're thinking there's no way you're going to die. You're getting out of this. But I worked that into the story. You don't just lose 4 fatigue points. Your character doesn't lose 4 fatigue points. You watch personally, if not as a player character or as a role player, but as a human being, if you see somebody get hit by a car or something, or you see an accident, you feel that emotional dead blow to your soul. It's a traumatic experience, and in context of the game mechanics translates that into a loss of fatigue. So it was just a one-shot deal. I honestly didn't know if they were going to survive or not. They're very lucky they did. One of the players got hurt pretty bad, but after a couple pretty ballsy moves on their part to take him down, they ended up backing over poor Jason Voorhees and booking it right back out to the fucking highway. And both their characters survived, and they had a good time, and my new player learned game mechanics. I don't want to say I don't know where the fuck I was going with this narrative, because I didn't come up with as I'm filming this, I don't have a title. Of course, when you watch it, it'll be titled. But I think my point is this, the game should not be about mechanics. Making characters should not feel like a chore. Running the game should not feel like a chore. As a GM, if your heart's not in it, it's going to feel like work, and that's not fun to your players. As a player, if you're just doing it to have something to do, then your heart's not in it either, and that affects all the other players, and that affects the GM. And that especially affects the GM, because they're the ones that have to have that energy. And if players come to the table excited, the GM comes to the table excited, everybody feeds into that. And by keeping the game mechanics and the narrative intertwined, so that way it's integral to itself, making those rolls doesn't slow down the action, it keeps going. It keeps the players not just mentally invested, but physically invested, because they're physically rolling. They don't have time to make little fucking dice towers or whatever, or dick on their phone if their hands are full of the dice. So you keep them invested, especially if you do have players that do get distracted. Rolling the dice should not be a mechanic that slows it down. Rolling the dice should be a mechanic that keeps it going. Character creation should be not just writing out a character, but you're creating that character. That character doesn't exist except inside your head. All the sheet is a piece of paper that lets your GM, or if you want to share it with the other players, it's a way that you can reference to them what that character is and give some context to the dice. But the story, the characters, the game mechanics should all come together. It shouldn't be about one or the other, or certain aspects here and there. It's about the whole narrative. And at the end of the game, I think it's like a 4-hour game essentially, maybe a little bit short. Maybe it was only like about 4 hours after character creation we were able to get going. But they enjoyed it, and I don't normally do one shots like that, but it just kind of came to me as an idea. What can I do that I don't have to listen to them argue what we're going to do all day, and well, I don't care, we're up for whatever. No, you guys are not up for whatever, because that's why no one wants to make characters. So make yourself. I'm not going to tell you why. Just make the best you as a character you can, and they loved it. So I encourage any GM that's having similar problems, if you're having people not show up, or your group's not always a very consistent, same people game to game, or you have a lot of people that are learning the GURPS system, or any system for that matter. It doesn't have to be GURPS, but it would be easier in GURPS because it's a classless system. It's a free-form system. But I suppose with a little bit of work, you could tailor it to the White Wolf system, or Dungeons and Dragons, I guess. But it'd be a little bit different. But have them make themselves and throw them in an adventure. I already had the Jason Voorhees NPC before, so it was already a done deal for me. And I just kind of figured, I've seen enough horror movies. Well, you're at the end of the road. There's got to be a path. There's got to be evidence. There's got to be something in context. And I tried to give as vivid descriptions as I could, and I let the players really own their decisions and feel that they're telling the story along with me. Just some food for thought. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe, and if not, go fuck yourself.